Valentine's Day is a great time to talk about the things that we love, and I love jank. I'm always saying it, I'm always talking about how much I like janky games, and it sounds like a bit, so I thought today let's actually explain why. What are the joys of jank? I suppose a little primer before we start what actually is jank. I feel like it's a phrase that everybody just uses and understands, but I also know I always have my head dunked into the gaming YouTube kind of think tank, so that might not be quite right. So jank, when applied to a game, usually implies some sort of weirdness or clunkiness or lack of quality somewhere. People generally use this to talk about when the mechanics or the physics of a thing are really buggy, sometimes if the animation quality is strange. I think sometimes people might even say it about stilted voice acting or a strange storyline, but generally it just means that game doesn't fit into kind of the mainstream conception of a quality product. But I don't care about all that. The vast majority of stuff that I like is kind of weird or offbeat. Films, music, books, games, you name it. I just like stuff that's a little bit unusual. And I think the main reason why, especially in the case of games, is that where there's jank, there's usually also ambition. As a general rule, if something isn't working exactly how it should or seems a bit patched together in a strange way, it's probably because the team making the game had bigger ideas than their budget or technology or skill level allowed them to realise. I'll throw out a few examples so you can get the vibe of what I mean. This game here is Hybrid Heaven, and it's my favourite Nintendo 64 game. It got pretty middling reviews at the time, certainly didn't set the world alight, I don't think it's remembered particularly fondly. But I love it, and I come back to it almost every year. So what's the jank here then? Well, where do we even start? The voice acting is very strange and hammy, although that was par for the course for games back then. A lot of the textures and corridors feel very samey and copy-paste. And just the actual premise of what you're doing in the game is really weird. I mean, the vast majority of the time you're doing pro wrestling moves on aliens. So it's definitely a weird and offbeat game. But here's the thing, I love this battle system. It's a little bit like the Parasite Eve 1 battle system, I suppose, insofar as that you can move freely around the grid, and your proximity to characters actually does matter. If I run away to the other side of the room, this guy can't grab me, stuff like that. The leveling up system's really weird, you level up different body parts the more you use it, so if I do a lot of right punches, I'll have a really strong right arm and a really weak left arm. So you're running around some vaguely Terminator or Blade Runner inspired environments, shooting little pew pew drones, doing some platformy puzzly bits, and mainly just body slamming aliens into oblivion. Can fully imagine myself doing a complete video on this at some point, so I don't want to go on at great length, but I just wanted to give you this idea. There's a lot here to present this game as very clunky, very janky, and not a product of the highest quality, but I would always say that this afforded me a very unique experience. This battle system is great, it's a lot of fun to engage with, and you don't get this in more mainstream stuff like Final Fantasy that's generally considered of a higher quality. Now let's jump onto the Xbox for a minute for a game called New Legends. Again, one of my favourites, and again, very janky. Everything about this game is really strange. The setting, the character models, the combat system, the way that they very obviously had to cut out massive parts of the story so you don't even get a cutscene before the final boss, you just suddenly appear in a room with him. That kind of stuff. I couldn't argue with somebody and try and say this is a really high quality game, but it is an incredibly charming game, and again, a very unique game. Take a look at this setting here. It's a really interesting blend of kind of modern day stuff but with sort of Chinese mythology thrown in. I think that's called wuxia when a work does that. But then on top of that, you got tanks and you got steampunky pistols and you've got crazy futuristic looking armies and ninjas. There's a lot thrown into this game. I could never hand this to somebody and say, look, you're going to have a really polished AAA experience. But what I could say is that this game is very original in its setting. It's going to show you some really unique stuff that you probably haven't seen. Even just down to the way that you can have one weapon in one hand and one in the other, and your combo system will update accordingly, and there's lots of different mixing and matching to do. I'm sure there are other games that do that, but this was probably an early example. And I could of course talk about Blue Stinger, but I always talk about Blue Stinger. So instead of me doing that here, just go and listen to the Christmas podcast that I did with the lads at the Dreamcast Junkyard, that was a banger. But I think you're probably starting to see the shape of what I'm talking about here. It's not necessarily that I like things to be inherently busted or broken, and of course some games that I like that are just bad, shovelware, slop, this kind of thing. But I think more often when a game is a little bit quirky or weird or clunky, there's more under the surface if you just give it a little bit of time and sit with it. You can very often find unique ideas nestled in there, be it interesting combat systems like I talked about with Hybrid Heaven, or crazy worlds like New Legends, or interesting character designs like these guys here in Sengoku Turb. Now the actual gameplay of Sengoku Turb is a bit of a rough pill to swallow. You can't even turn and run at the same time. But I also kinda don't feel like the gameplay is the point. Look at this like place you would see in a dream. Look at these wild, surreal characters. You ever seen anything like this? I haven't, outside of this game, certainly not. I suppose it's kind of vaguely low poly, cel shady-esque things like Mega Man Legends or Skies of Arcadia, but then it's really ramped up to 10, everything's overly simplified, overly angular, overly strange. But it looks cool as hell, right? I think I've got my dad to thank for my love of jank. Ever since we played Blue Stinger together, he knew I was into this kind of thing. So sometimes he'd just come home from work one day with a random game and be like, check this out. And it'd just be some strange thing that wasn't in the charts or I'd never heard of, but I'd really enjoy it. I actually discovered some of my favourite games that way. And it's a bit of a dying art too, we don't really see a lot of those janky budget titles these days. Even modern games that are considered janky, something like Wanted Dead, which I love. But it works perfectly well, the combat's great, it looks fine. It's just a little bit weird, but it's not like super janky like the stuff we got in the 5th and 6th gen, certainly not. I suppose as always that kind of thing is reserved for the indie space. But even then there's crazy talent in the indie space, and a lot of those devs are good at making just very smooth fill-in, professional looking games that don't have very much jank to them. But I will always revisit the jank of my youth. Those are the games that I'm always itching to play, those are the games that really give me life. And it's the stuff that I'll always just continue to look out for. I don't have any quarrel with people that just want to play God of War or Call of Duty or this kind of thing. I'm not throwing any shade, everybody has their own taste. But for me, when something becomes very standardised or very mainstream or very kind of made by committee to smooth off the edges, it just loses its appeal to me. I'm kind of a freak, I just want stuff that's a little bit weird. And I hope in this short Valentine's Day transmission that I've somehow convinced you to maybe get out into the world and check out a little bit of the jank out there. I do hope you've enjoyed the video, thank you very, very much for watching as always. Please leave me a like and a nice comment if you feel inclined to do so, and I will see you in the next one.